Hello, at 1,000 subscribers, I will make a special series of stories for you. Evening hung over the Caldwell place, like a lid on a simmering pot. Heat lifted from the hard pan in wavering sheets, carrying the day's smell of alfalfa and horse sweat and sun-baked iron. The windmill creaked and ticked, taking slow sips from the well, and the hens murmured to one another as they settled on their roosts. Mary Lou Caldwell moved through the chores while Phil latched the coop, checked the gate on the hog pen twice, tugged the barn door until the rasping wood agreed to close, and all the while she kept an ear cocked to the desert, the way you do when you've lived long enough to know the land talks at dusk. Her father had ridden into Hilla Bend that afternoon to argue irrigation at the meeting hall. "You mind the east field," he'd told her, bony finger wagging. "Coyotes been bold, and men bolder. Lock up before dark." He'd changed since Ma died. Harder in the jaw, harder everywhere. Mary Lou would have argued if it did any good. Instead, she nodded and watched the dust of his horse fade down the stage road. And then she did the work of two people in the heat of August without complaining to anyone but the mule Dot. By the time the first star pricked through, she had only the corn patch left. The patch pa swore would save them if the river stayed fickle, and the cattle buyers kept their prices mean. Rose ran straight as thread under her hand, thanks to a string line and the stubbornness she'd inherited from him. The stalks rose shoulder high and rattled in the breeze like some giant whispering in his sleep. She took the feed pail and her lantern. Fire's small eye swam in the glass when she touched match to wick. "Come on, Whiskey," she called, and a yellow dog with a ragged ear bounded from under the porch, tail flagging. They were halfway to the corn when Whiskey stopped so fast he skidded. The hair on his back rose. He made a sound she didn't hear from him, often a low, strangled thing like the warning twist in a fiddle string right before it snaps. Mary Lou's step faltered. "Easy," she told herself, "not the dog. Coyotes could churn and yip. Cats cried like babies." Javelina snorted. She knew the book of the desert by heart. But the sound that came then, brush parting, a weight slipping where no cattle should be, didn't sit in any chapter. She lifted the lantern, got 2 rows in. Something moved more shadow than shape, and shapen. The corn leaned as if a bull pushed through, only there was no bellow, no clatter of hoof. Just a heavy, patient shuck-shuck, and now and then a quick click, like stones wrapped together. Dot at first she thought of alligators, because of the carnival poster she'd stared at last winter in town. Behold, the American crocodile, the dragon of the bayous. A snarling green mouth printed in lurid ink had hung outside the saloon for 3 days, until sleet turned it to pulp. Pa had said there wasn't any such beasts this far west. You couldn't trust posters. You couldn't trust showmen. But she felt a cold line draw along her spine all the same. The feed pail knocked her leg. She set it down without looking, fingers gone careful. "Whiskey," she whispered. "Home." The dog didn't argue. He backed away, legs stiff, and then spun and ran. Mary Lou took one breath and stepped into the row. Lantern light stitched the world into small pieces. The flames swung in through her shadow like a tall scarecrow over the tasseled heads. She picked her way between stalks, boots whispering in hoed dirt. The smell in there was sweet and green and moldering, like old rain trapped under leaves. Then another smell slid over to sour reptile musk that felt older than anything she knew, older than the rusted horseshoe nailed to the barn beam for luck, older than barbed wire and windmills, and the railroad steel glint on the horizon. Shape flickered ahead. She froze. It lifted its head above the corn, and the world narrowed to the length of her breath. The thing was long and low as a felled log, but the way it moved was wrong for any log. Scales lay on it like hammered tin, overlapping. A forked tongue tasted the air with a wet, eerie quickness. Its eyes caught her lantern and cut the light in two sharp coins. The mouth saint's preserve was a hinge of pale, drooling pink, studded with teeth notched like broken bottles. It didn't hiss. It just looked at her like it was measuring her height, shape, distance, the way a man measures a post before sawing. She didn't know to call it a dragon. She didn't know any name that fit. All she knew was that the thing belonged somewhere far from corn and homesteads and a girl with calloused hands. Somewhere it had not wandered by accident. Her first thought was the rifle. Pa kept it in the kitchen corner and would have never let her come out after dark without it if he'd been home. But the second thought rose up and smothered the first. If she went back inside, by the time she returned, every stalk in this patch might be flattened. And the winter that waited past, the harvest would tighten into something ugly. Besides, she had a feeling that shooting at it would be like throwing rocks at a thunderhead. You might make yourself feel brave. You wouldn't hurt the storm, Dot. She took a slow step. The lantern clinked against the glass as her hand trembled and, steadied, the creature turned. It poured itself through the rows with a low, dense power that bent plants and snapped the stalk clean like dry kindling. Mary Lou swore softly and followed, skirts gathered in one hand, the other holding the lantern high. A leaf slapped her face. She tasted dust and sap. A grasshopper, clumsy with evening cold, bounced off her mouth, and she spat it away. She kept. Going Dot, the corn gave out at the irrigation ditch. The ditch was mostly dry, a trickle glittering like melted coin under the moon, because the river had sulked all July. Beyond it lay the east pasture, thin with grama grass and dotted with prickly. Pear, and further still, the wash that cut toward the Santa Catalinas, red as raw meat where the flash floods had bitten it. The dragon slid down the bank and wallowed through the trickle, leaving a dark smear where the water took the dust from its hide. Mary Lou hesitated. She could stop here, run to the neighbors, fetch men and guns. She could say she'd tried. But a memory of those measuring eyes crawled under her ribs. If she let it go, it would come back. She jumped the ditch. Immediately the night changed. The farm's sound squeak of windmill, mutter of hens, the known, domestic clatter fell behind her like the last notes of a hymn. In their place rose the open dark, coyotes yipping from a far draw, an owl's question from the cottonwoods, the old iron rails of the abandoned spur clicking softly as they cooled. The lantern's ring of light turned the world to a stage where she stood and everything else waited just beyond the curtain. Mary Lou, you plumb fool, she heard her father's voice say inside her own head. Ain't a thing out there you can't face better in daylight. Maybe. But daylight would be too late, Dot. She pushed herself into a jog that shook the flame in the lantern. The beast moved like water poured from a bucket, flowing over stones, around patches of cholla, up the low swell of a ridge. Once it stopped, dead, and lifted its head again, tasting the air. She dropped into a crouch behind a palo verde and held her breath so hard her chest rattled. After a long minute, it went on. She realized then that it wasn't wandering. It had a line, a purpose. As if some cord stretched from it to the far dark. Pulling, the dog reappeared suddenly at her heels, silent as a shadow and more loyal than wise. She made a face at him and snapped soft through her teeth. Go on now. Home. Whiskey's ears flattened. He slunk, then balked. When she feinted a kick, he finally turned reluctant, every step screaming that he'd rather follow, but trusting. Her command more than his fear. Good boy, she murmured, barely a breath. Asterisk, she kept the lantern hooded with her palm after that, feeding just enough light to see rocks before they saw her shins. The sky opened up and filled with stars so bright she felt she could pluck one and keep it in her pocket. A fall of heat lightning stitched the far horizon without thunder, just pale veins crawling the sky's dark skin. The smell of creosote crept in far storm somewhere. Old rain waking old perfume Dot. She cut across the corner of the neighbor's range and skirted the place where a steer had died in June. The bones now picked clean and set in the grass like a crude white map. Below the ridge, the ground dropped into a shallow basin where mesquite grew thick. She could hear the dragon before she saw it, a rustle and a low scrape of belly scales on dirt that made her molars ache. Dragons are for stories, she muttered, because saying the foolish thing out loud made the fool in it smaller. Posters, not for here, but here it was. Here she was. As she slipped under the mesquite, a memory came, strange and clear. A peddler's wagon pulling into their yard in April, sun-webbed canvas and brass buckles, a rattling crate covered with a horse blanket that had reeked of that same old reptile. Musk, the man had palm leaves tattooed on his fingers and a gentle snake coiled in his shirt front like a necktie. He'd traded penny sweets to the boys on the Farragotha place, and his eyes had skipped across the Caldwell fields like he was counting. Something. Been to San Diego, he'd boasted to Pa. Seen oceans bigger than 10 deserts. Seen lizards long as a pew. Pa had snorted and bought tin tacks. The peddler had left before supper, horse lathered as if something chased him. That night, the dogs had barked until their throats rasped, and for 3 days after, the chickens wouldn't go near the far fence. Mary Lou filed the memory away and focused on her feet. She could not afford to stumble. Cholia would have her in a heartbeat if she put a heel wrong. She kept the lantern low and her eyes lower. A pair of rabbits bolted at her approach and vanished like spilled shadows. Somewhere ahead, the creature struck something with a sound like a pit-biting stone. She flinched, then came silence, the kind that makes your ears ring. She reached the basin's far lip and climbed, palms taking prickles, boots sending pebbles ticking down. At the top, the land leaned into a sweep of rolling country that funneled toward the old Silver Mercy claim, a mouth of earth on the north face of a hogback, ringed with tailings and the bones of busted dreams. Men had dug there hard for a winter. 6 years passed, until one night the ground went hollow with a groan, and the Mercy claimed 3 of them in a single breath. Pa had walked Mary Lou past it once at noon and said, "You feel that?" She hadn't felt anything but the sun. He'd said, "There's places the land remembers what's done to it." The dragon's line arrowed that way. She paused long, enough to sip the warm tin taste of her canteen and wet a bandana to press against her neck. Sweat slicked her hairline and ran salt into her eyes. She wiped it with the heel of her hand and left a faint smear of dirt across her brow the way a priest might mark a penitent. She should turn back. Every sensible part of her agreed. But there are some moments a person knows what they're for, like the way you know a gate will swing open before you touch it. She wasn't for waiting. Not this time. Not with the corn they needed, and the gnawing sense that the thing, if left to its own business, would make its business theirs. She went on Dot. The ground firmed into rock. The lantern's light found ribs of basalt and gleams of mica like crumbs, of glass scattered by a careless child. She lengthened her stride and felt her legs stretch loose into the rhythm that had always made her feel most her self-fence-line long trots. Errands done in miles, the big sky laid like a hand over her scalp. Fear went thin, thready, and something like wonder swelled in its place. The creature ahead moved with a terrible grace. In it was a promise she couldn't name and didn't trust, but wanted to understand, not just because of the farm. Because it had looked at her Dot right at the ridge. She almost lost it. A gust took the lantern, and the flame guttered until the world snapped black. Her breath caught. With the automatic skill of 10 winters' practice, She cupped the glass and thumbed the knob to feed the wick. The flame licked tall, then steadied. The lantern's sooty eye opened again. There, just beyond her ring of light, two pale scratches on stone, parallel as rails, claw marks, fresh enough to glisten where they'd scraped through the dusty skin. She angled that way and found a place where scales had polished rock so smooth it shone. The wind cleared its throat in the ocotillo. Owls talked it over in short, hushed notes from different stands of mesquite, as if passing a secret from beak to beak. Far behind her, the windmill caught and turned, and the squeak came faint and dear, the way a cradle squeaks when someone you love sleeps in it. She crested the ridge. The land fell away into a shallow valley slicked with moonlight. At the far end, the hogback hunched up against the sky like a sleeping mule, and there, black on black, was the mouth of the Silver Mercy. A breath of cold slid up from it, enough to prickle the sweat on her forearms. The tailings sloped away in tailless piles that shone like fish scales where the moon struck mica. And down that pale spill, slow as a prayer, went the dragon dot. It paused once and lifted its head. The tongue touched even the moonlight, quick and black. Then it slipped into the dark and was gone. Mary Lou stood with the lantern in her hand and felt the night balance around her like a scale. Behind her lay the farm, the corn, the list of things that did and did not belong to a Caldwell. Before her lay a hole full of old stories and fresh quiet and something that pulled at her as surely as the moon pulls a tide. She could turn back now, fetch men, hire out guns, tell this like a tale at the meeting hall with her hands wide and her eyes wider. Or she could do what the look in that thing's eyes had asked of her without words. See for herself. She took one long breath of the world creosote and dust and a taste of metal and stepped down the slope toward the mine. The lantern's light drawing a little circle of morning around her feet in the middle of the night. The mouth of the Silver Mercy looked like a ragged letter torn into the hill. Up close, the boards nailed across it years ago were half-rotted and pried aside by someone who'd known what they were doing. The nails still clung to splinters like broken teeth. Mary Lou set the lantern on a rock and pushed one board. It creaked, then gave. Cold air breathed out of the gap-damp, metallic, a cave's breath that lived on without the sun. She eased through sideways. Her skirts snagged on. A nail and ripped. She didn't swear. She saved her breath. Inside, the world shrank to the reach of her light. The adit ran straight for 20 yards, shored by timber sets that had dried and split along their grain. Old pick scars ribbed the walls. Drips paced the silence. Somewhere deeper, water talked to itself in a slow, secret voice. She held the lantern up and watched the flame. Pa had taught her that air was a thing you could read. If the flame went long and thin, turn back. If it guttered and died, you were a fool for walking in the first place. It burned steady, small, and round. Good enough dot, she marked the first timber with a chalk X from her pocket. She carried chalk for tallying feed, and sometimes the days since rain. It felt right to leave a sign for herself. She went on. Pack-rat nests humped in the corners, jeweled, with thefts, a spoon, a broken hinge, a blue glass bead someone had once sewn to a dress and then forgotten. At her approach, whiskers quivered and then vanished deeper into sticks. A tarantula as big as her palm eased itself into a crevice, careful as a gentleman. She let them be. They let her be. Her lantern licked light along the floor. Boot prints had softened with dust, but were still readable men's sizes, different heels, walking single file. Some prints were new enough to hold a ridge. A scrap of tobacco pouch lay trampled flat, its paper browned by damp. The place wasn't abandoned, after all. Or if it was, it had recently been visited by folks who didn't much care for notices. She found the first sign of the thing she followed, where the adit widened at a turn. A smear lay on the sunk wet mud, dragged by a heavy belly. A scale had caught on a splinter and torn free. She pinched it between finger and thumb. It was thick as a chip of bottle glass, and rough like a file. In the lantern's glow, it flashed an oil-dark green. She swallowed and slid it into her pocket, not sure why she wanted to keep it, and more sure she wouldn't be able to throw it away. Not a story, she whispered, just to hear a voice. Not a poster. The tunnel bent left, then right. The roof lowered, so she had to duck. Bats hung above like dead leaves. One dropped, skimmed past her hair, and was gone. She flinched, laughed once short and breathless, and kept moving. On the right-hand wall, the miners had chalked a tally years ago, a forest of sticks that stopped at 30 and started again elsewhere. Next to it, someone had pressed a palm into wet silt and left a child's handprint. How a child's hand had come to be in a silver mine, she could not guess. Maybe a picnic at the mouth, a dare that went too far. Maybe you never knew what got into people when the talk was rich and the ground made promises. She stepped over a rusted ore cart on a broken rail. Its wheels had sunk into the floor as if the mine were slowly eating what it no longer needed. The dragon had gone around it, as smooth as water dot further in. The air grew cooler. She lifted the bandana from her neck, wet as it was, and tied it across her nose and mouth to take the bite out of the smell. Not stink, just a dense, old scent like coin in a fist dot at a junction the tunnel forked. One way went down, steeper, the roof braced by new timbers set beside the old. The boards were saw-cut and fresh-faced where the grain showed, not yet darkened by years. Someone had hauled lumber in here recently. The other way climbed toward a stope that had caved and left only a flat fan of dust. She crouched and studied the floor again. Men's boots had gone both ways. The belly smear went down. You've got business deeper, she told the air, and took the slope. The pitch pinched her calves. She kept the lantern low, so its light didn't blind her to the ground. Twice she stopped to test the air again. The flame swayed, but did not thin. She took that as permission. At one landing, someone had left a crate. The stencils on the lid had blurred with damp, but some letters still showed through exebe, then a tear, then Ev Speck. She brushed. Grid aside. Under the stenciling, a second, fainter set of letters showed in a different hand. San Diego. The brace along one side was racked with tarred rope cut ragged with a knife. On the lid, a brass hinge hung twisted, as if something inside had thrown its weight against it over and over. She put her palm on the wood. Cold, but she felt heat in the memory of it. The crate smelled like the cornfield had smelled, like the peddler's blanket, months ago. Her stomach went tight. She pictured the man with the tattooed fingers and the too bright smile. Pictured how fast he'd left their place, like a bee, shot from a flower. Maybe he hadn't just carried tacks and ribbons and sugar. Maybe some foolish or wicked bargain had started far from here and ended in her cornrows. Saints help us, she murmured, and kept going. The tunnel narrowed to a squeeze, so tight she had to crab sideways with the lantern held out. Rock scraped her shoulder and bit a seam of her dress, so hard she heard the thread pop. The sound boomed in the small space like a gunshot. She set her teeth and slid. When the squeeze opened, her breath came again. She rested, one hand on the timber, feeling. The weak tremor a mine always had, the tiny music of rocks remembering the pressure of mountains. The sound changed. Not dripping, not a bat. A scrape and a drag, yes, but under that, a light, intermittent tapping like someone knocking a spoon against a tin cup once every 10 heartbeats. She froze. The lantern flame ticked. The tapping stopped. Then came again. From farther off and deeper, as regular as a pulse. She walked toward it. The floor turned to planks laid over a winze. She put the lantern close and saw the black mouth of a vertical shaft under the boards. A draft came up through it and fluttered her skirt. Far below, water shivered with a faint, lake-scent cold. She tested the nearest board with her boot and felt it hold. She crossed without looking down any more than she had to. On the far side, the air picked up a new taste, something peppery that stung the back of her throat. Powder. She found the wrappers a few paces later sloughed red paper. That had once wrapped dynamite sticks, the brand name worn to ghosts. No sticks left in the box. She didn't touch the box anyway. Men with powder and fresh-cut timbers and a reason to pry boards, she said into her bandana. The words steadied her. They made shapes she could hold. Better than letting fear. No holes in her thinking. The dragon had paused here. She could tell. The marks on the floor were a muddle, as if it had turned, considered, and chosen. Before the marks went on, they came together in a tight arc, like a body coiling and uncoiling. She pictured it crouched and waiting, and her ribs cinched down. But no bones littered the place. No torn cloth, no sign of a fight. If men had come and gone, the thing had let them. The tunnel broadened. The tapping grew louder, slower. She realized it wasn't tapping at all. It was dripping from a height into a pool, and in the pause between drops, the mind sang a low glass note. That was what she'd heard in old, thin music. The dragon's line of slime and scale shine led toward the sound. Her lantern's light brushed a different color on the wall. She stopped and swung it back. Not mica, not the wink of water. A deeper green lay under the silver stone shot through with moss-dark veins. It was not glowing. But when she held the lantern near, the green seemed to gather the light and hold. It the way a bottle holds sunlight on a windowsill. She set her fingers on it and felt a faint warmth she couldn't account for. Heat should move away from the rock, not out of it. She took her hand back and wiped it on her skirt for no good reason. Asterisk down the tunnel, there came a scraping shudder, scale on stone, like a bow drawn across a bass string. The sound rolled through her bones. She swallowed and set her shoulders. And went. The floor fell another foot. She stepped down and almost lost the lantern. She clutched it, breath hissing through her teeth. The chamber ahead opened without warning. Its roof arched, black above the reach of light. The drip song went from single notes to a choir. Echo nested in echo. She smelled water and the sharp iron of ore, and under that the reptile musk was deeper, heavier, like an old coat. There it was Dot. It lay half in the pool that cupped the chamber floor, half on the smooth rock lip, long body curled, tail laid out like a rope. The lantern made scales shine in little coins. One foreleg was scarred up from the elbow-fresh rope. Urns cut clean into callus. It flicked its tongue into the damp air, and for a breath watched her as if the mine itself had opened an eye. It did not rise. It did not rush. It seemed to be waiting, and the waiting felt like a test. Mary Lou set the lantern down on a flat rock so the light would be steady, and lifted her hands to show them empty. "I'm not here to hurt you," she said, feeling foolish and not caring. "I'm here because you came to my corn." The words bounced from the walls and came back thin. The dragon blinked film across its eyes and moved its head not away, or toward, but aside an odd, deliberate motion, as if pointing. She followed the line of its muzzle. On the far wall, behind a spill of tumbled rock, the green she'd seen before ran in a thicker vein. Not a seam. A bulge, almost like a blister in the earth's skin. The light pooled in it and deepened, not glowing not yet, but collecting itself. The dragon lifted its head again, tongue sampling the air, and made a sound lower than speech. a chest-deep rumble that barely disturbed the water. "You're guarding it," she said. The idea landed in her like a dropped coin. She didn't know from what, or for whom. But the fit was neat. She edged around the pool, keeping space between herself and the creature. It tracked her without moving anything but its eyes. At the rockfall, her lantern showed the edge of a wooden wedge, hammered into a crack to pry a chunk loose. Men had been trying at it. They weren't finished. Boot prints overlapped the dragon's marks here. One set had a nick out of the heel, the print showing a little crescent missing like a bitten cookie. The man walked with his right foot turned a hair outward. She didn't know why she noticed, only that she did. Details felt like weapons. She would take every one. She knelt to look. In the dust by the wedge lay the butt of a cigarette, lipstick. On the paper, Mary Lou stared. She touched it, then drew her hand back. Maybe not lipstick. Maybe the rolling paper had picked up the stain of someone's berry-chewed mouth. Or maybe it was what it looked like. Not only men, then, a threat of. Ash shifted. The faintest breeze pulled out of the tunnel behind her and slid across the pool. The dragon's head lifted a finger's width higher. Its chest filled and eased. The long tail tapped once on stone, a sound like a knuckle on a table. Not warning, not welcome. Something between. She set her palm to the rock near the green, not quite touching the colored seam. Warmth bled up again, and with the warmth, a murmured pressure that felt for an instant like standing too close to a church organ when someone pressed the lowest key. Not sound. Wait, deep and patient. She rocked back on her heels and sat, lantern about an arm's length away on its flat rock. The flame rode its small circle on the mine's black. She let herself breathe, let her heart slow to something that wasn't rattling itself apart. She thought of Peah at the meeting hall, voice rough with anger and hope, trying to squeeze water from men as stubborn as the land. She thought of the peddler's horse throwing foam. She thought of the way corn leaned when something big passed. She tried to stitch those pictures together and failed. From deeper still past the chamber, past the dragon, there came a scrape, faint enough to doubt. She looked up. The dragon looked, too. At her. Past her. The scrape became a boot scuff. Then another, slow and careful as someone who knew how echoes traveled. Light winked on rock down the tunnel, just a breath of it, as if a lamp were hooded. And lifted, then hooded again. The faint peppery taste in the air strengthened. Mary Lou rose in a crouch and slid the lantern behind a fallen slab, so its light cut sideways across the floor and left the tunnel mouth in deeper shadow. She set her hand against the warm seam without thinking, as if the heat in the rock might travel up into her courage. Easy now, she whispered, not to the dragon, not to the strangers, but to herself. Time to see who else heard the music. The scrape of careful steps came closer, steady, unhurried, like men who had done this before. The dragon made no sound at all. Its tongue tasted the air again, quick as a thought, then vanished. Mary Lou gathered herself in the dim and waited with the mine's breath in her lungs and the rock's faint warmth cooling in her palm. The stranger's boots scuffed closer, deliberate as ticks on a clock. Mary Lou pressed her back to the rockfall, keeping herself half hidden in shadow. The lantern she'd slid behind the slab painted only the edge of the chamber, leading her in a gray hush. A whisper drifted down the tunnel. Easy. Keep that light low. The voice was raspy, worn from smoke and grit. Another man muttered, I ain't afeard, but I don't fancy meeting it in the dark neither. Mary Lou's chest pulled tight. They knew. They'd been here before. The dragon stirred at the sound, but it did not charge. Its bulk shifted in the pool, sending ripples slapping soft against stone. It raised its head, tongue darting, eyes burning with the faint shine of coals and ash. 2 men entered the chamber, their lamps hooded to thin slits of light. One was tall and narrow-shouldered, with a beard that hung in straggles. His coat was patched at the elbows, but his revolver shone polished. The other was thick-set, jaw like a shovel, hat brim pulled low. A coil of rope hung from his belt beside a pry bar. Both stopped short when they saw the dragon sprawled at the waters. The bearded one exhaled slow, as though savoring the sight. "Still sitting right where we left it," the thick-set man spat. "I don't like the way it looks at me, Eli. Ain't natural. It don't matter what it looks at. What matters is the ore." Eli tilted his lamp toward the wall. Mary Lou had touched the green seam gleaming faintly in the lantern's light. "There, richer than silver, I reckon. Worth more'n cattle, more'n land." Mary Lou's fingers curled tight against the stone. She could feel the warmth again, pulsing faint like a heartbeat. Ore, Eli called it, but it was more than that. She knew it in her bones. The dragon's chest rumbled. It shifted its weight. Forward, head low, tail twitching. The thick-set man flinched back, fumbling for the pistol at his hip. "Leave it," Eli snapped. "Shootin' won't do us no good, but rouse the beast. You saw what happened last time. Last time." The words thudded heavy in Mary Lou's ears. These weren't men stumbling on a mystery. They were trespassers returning to steal what the dragon guarded. Eli took the pry bar from his partner and strode toward the rock wall. He moved like a man certain of his right, certain that no law of God nor nature could stop him. He wedged the bar into the crack near the wooden wedge already hammered there. "Hold the lamp," he ordered. The thick-set man obeyed, though his hand trembled. The chamber filled with the squeal of metal on stone as Eli levered, muscles bunching in his thin arms. Bits of rock showered to the ground. The green seam shivered with reflected light, like something alive beneath glass. The dragon surged half. A step forward. The pool slapped louder. Its jaws opened, and a string of saliva fell sizzling onto the rock. Mary Lou's heart raced. Do something. She wanted to shout, to throw herself between the men and the wall, but fear held her tongue. The colt on Eli's belt gleamed whenever the lamp caught it. Then Eli grunted. "There she's loosening." The scene pulsed brighter as a chunk of rock shifted. A strange hum trembled in the air, so low it rattled Mary Lou's teeth. Eli laughed, wild and sharp. "Hear that? That's fortune singing, boys." The dragon roared. The sound was not like any beast. Mary Lou had heard it was thunder in a canyon, a mountain cracking open, the language of something older than men. The chamber shook. Dust rained from the ceiling beams. The thick-set man dropped the lamp with a curse, light swinging crazy across the walls. "Eli, we gotta go." But Eli braced the bar again, grinning through the quake. One more push. Mary Lou's fear broke. She darted from the shadows, seized the lamp before it hit the water, and shouted, "Stop!" The men spun. Eli's grin twisted. "Well, if it ain't the Caldwell girl, sneaking about where you got no business." His eyes flicked to her. Lantern, then to her face. "You saw, didn't you? You know what's hid here." Mary Lou lifted the lamp high. "I know it ain't yours, and I know it don't want you talking it." She jerked her chin toward the dragon, which loomed like a nightmare behind her, scales shivering in the lamplight. The thick-set man swore again and backed toward the tunnel. "Eli, she's right, this ain't worth dying for." But Eli's eyes shone fever bright. Everything's worth dying for, if it buys more'n a lifetime of scratching dirt. That lizard's just a guard dog, and dogs can be killed. He drew the Colt, the click echoing sharp. Mary Lou's blood turned to fire. She stepped between Eli and the dragon, raising the lantern like a shield. Her voice shook but carried. "You'll shoot me first, then, but I won't let you harm it. The dragon's eyes narrowed, watching. The hum from the stone deepened, a note so low it seemed to come from the earth itself. Eli's hand trembled. On the gun. His grin faltered. You? You don't understand what's here. No, Mary Lou said, her voice stronger now. But I know it ain't yours to take. It belongs to the land. Same as the river, same as the mountain. And you can't own that. For a breath, all was still the girl, the outlaw, the dragon, the green scene pulsing with strange life. Then the dragon struck, its tail lashed, sweeping the pry bar from Eli's hands and sending it clattering into the pool. Water exploded. Eli staggered, gun firing wild into the dark. The ceiling boomed with the ricochet. The thick-set man screamed and bolted down the tunnel. Lamp swinging, Eli tried to raise his gun again, but the dragon lunged, jaws snapping shut. Inches from his face. He shrieked, stumbling backward into the dust. Mary Lou held the lantern steady, her heart hammering, as the dragon loomed over him massive. Silent, waiting. Eli dropped the gun. His voice cracked. All right, I'll go. The dragon hissed, a sound like wind tearing through canyon walls. Eli scrambled up, slipping in the dust, and fled after his partner into the tunnel's dark. Their footsteps pounded until they vanished. Silence poured into the chamber again, broken only by the drip of water and Mary Lou's ragged breaths. Slowly, she turned. The dragon's gaze was on her, not the fleeing men. In its eyes she saw no hunger, no malice only, and intelligence that chilled and awed her at once. You spared me, she whispered. The dragon blinked once, slow, deliberate. Then it lowered its head, curling back toward the pool and the green stone. Mary Lou felt the hum fade from her bones. She clutched the lantern close, her hands shaking. The mind seemed larger now, stranger, as though she had stepped into the heart of some ancient secret, and she knew with certainty. What she had found here tonight was bigger than silver, bigger than the Caldwell farm, bigger than all the outlaws and cattlemen scratching at the desert. Something lived beneath the earth, something worth guarding. And for reasons she couldn't yet name, it had chosen not to destroy her. The echoes of the outlaw's flight dwindled into silence, swallowed by the mind's throat. Dust still hung in the lantern light, drifting in lazy spirals, carrying the bitter tang of gunpowder. Mary Lou stood trembling, lantern in hand, staring at the dragon as it resettled itself by the pool. Her knees wobbled like saplings in a windstorm. You should go, girl, she told herself. Run while it lets you. Run and don't look back. But something held her, something stronger than fear. The dragon dipped its head, not in menace, but in an odd, deliberate grace, as if acknowledging her presence. Its tongue flicked once, tasting the air around her. Mary Lou gripped the lantern, tighter, swallowing hard. I don't reckon you understand me, she whispered, voice echoing small in the chamber. But I thank you kindly all the same. The beast rumbled in reply, a sound so low she felt it in her ribs rather than heard it. The water in the pool quivered with each note. Her eyes wandered back to the wall, the green scene glowing faintly, like moonlight trapped in stone. She stepped closer. This time, she pressed her palm against it without hesitation. The warmth seeped through her skin, steady as a heartbeat. The longer she touched it, the stronger it pulsed, until she swore she felt it answer the rhythm of her own blood. Visions half-formed, flickering brushed her mind. Mountains rising, rivers carving their beds, storms pounding the desert, before men had ever staked claims on it. She gasped and tore her hand away, heart hammering. The dragon had not moved. It simply watched her. Mary Lou understood then. It isn't guarding silver. It's guarding life. Something old, something the land itself once hidden. And she had stumbled into it by chasing where she didn't belong. A new sound stirred in the tunnel, the faint clatter of rocks knocked loose by boots. Her breath caught. They came back, but no, these steps were lighter, quicker, uncertain. A smaller lantern glow appeared, and out of the tunnel came not Eli nor his partner, but another figure, a young boy, no older than 12, with shaggy hair and fear wide in his eyes. He carried a pickaxe half his size. Mary Lou blinked. What in blazes? The boy froze at the sight of her, then at the dragon. His face went pale as fresh milk. Mr. Eli said, I was supposed to wait. Outside. His voice cracked. I thought maybe I could help. Mary Lou's heart clenched. A child. Lord help us. The dragon stirred, tail twitching. The boy whimpered and raised the pick as if it could shield him. Mary Lou stepped forward quickly, putting herself between. Them. Easy, she soothed, speaking to both dragon and boy. Ain't nobody here's gonna hurt anyone. Not if I've got a say. The boy's eyes filled with tears. They said there's treasure. Said I'd get a cut if I helped. My ma's sick. I just wanted. His words broke into sobs. Mary Lou's anger flared hot at Eli, at his lies, at the way he'd dragged a child into something dark and dangerous. She laid a hand on the boy's shoulder. There ain't treasure here. Not the kind you can spend. What's down here don't belong to men like Eli, nor to us neither. You understand? He sniffled, nodding uncertainly. Behind them, the dragon let out another low rumble. This one wasn't warning, it was softer, almost curious. Its great head lowered until its eyes were level with Mary Lou and the boy. For an instant, she felt the weight of its gaze settle not on her, but on the child, as though measuring him the way it had measured her. The boy shuddered, clutching Mary Lou's skirt. It ain't gonna eat us, is it? She took a slow breath. No. If it wanted to, it would have long before now. The dragon blinked once, slow as a nod. Then it shifted, curling its tail tighter around the pool, and turned its gaze back to the glowing seam. Mary Lou understood. It's showing mercy, trusting me to do the same. She crouched before the boy. Listen, you run on home now. Tell your ma you don't need no outlaw silver to care for her. You hear me? You stay clear of Eli and his lot. The boy hesitated. But what about you? Mary Lou glanced back at the dragon. I've still got business here. She touched his cheek briefly, firm as her mother once had. Go. The boy gave her one last frightened look, then turned and bolted down the tunnel, lantern bobbing until its light disappeared. Silence returned. Only the drip of water and the dragon's breath filled the chamber. Mary Lou stood tall, squaring her shoulders. She looked at the beast and the glowing stone, at the secret she now carried. She thought of Pa back at the meeting hall, fighting over water rights. She thought of the endless arguments about fences and grazing and who owned what. All of it seemed small compared to this. The land was alive, and some part of it had trusted her with its secret. She lifted her lantern in a small salute to the dragon. I'll keep it safe, she whispered. I'll keep you safe. That's a Caldwell. Promise. The dragon blinked again, slow and solemn, then lowered its head onto its forelegs like a sentinel resting. Mary Lou turned, lantern swinging, and walked back into the dark. Each step echoed like a vow. The dawn met her as she emerged from the yaw. Mine first light, spilling pink and gold across the desert. Her dog Whiskey came bounding up, whining, tail lashing. She dropped to her knees, burying her face in his scruff, tears finally spilling hot and silent. When she rose, she looked east, where the sun lit the rows of her father's corn. It seemed smaller now, yet more precious, part of a world deeper, and stranger than she had ever dreamed. She knew she would never speak of what lay beneath the silver mercy, not to Pa, not to the neighbors, not to anyone. Some secrets weren't meant to be sold, or even shared. but in her heart she carried it. And that was enough. Mary Lou Caldwell, the farmer's daughter who had chased a dragon one evening, had found something greater than gold. She had found her courage, her place, and a bond with the wild, beating heart of the land itself. And that she knew had changed everything.